I ended up going with Keith to Hong Kong, China, and speaking 2 of our books. One that I wrote, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, this book here. This was translated into Chinese in Hong Kong. And then a book I co-wrote with Keith, A Prayer to Our Father, that was translated into Chinese in Hong Kong. And after it was translated, they said, look, we can distribute this in Hong Kong, but we can't distribute it in mainland China. Because mainland China has 70 million Christians, but there's no freedom of religion. Especially foreigners aren't allowed to teach about faith in China. It's illegal. So he said, we have this opportunity to get the book, A Prayer to Our Father, into the hands of 5,000 pastors from mainland China. They're coming for a conference in Hong Kong, but we can only do this if you're willing to give up your loyalty. And I said, I'll never give up my loyalty. I'm a citizen of the United States and a citizen of Israel, and I will not swear allegiance to the People's Republic of China. And Keith said, Nehemia, he means your royalty. So we gave out 5,000 books, never saw a penny.
And you had some flight lice while you were at it.
Well, anyway, we end up going after this to Hong Kong to speak about A Prayer to Our Father and the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. And we said, we'll only come to Hong Kong if you let us speak in mainland China too. What we didn't know is it's impossible for foreigners to come speak in mainland China. There's a law, a foreign pastor cannot preach in mainland China in the churches. But the way they were able to get us in is they said, look, Nehemia has a master's degree in biblical studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He can come into the churches and speak about the history and culture of ancient Israel and the archaeology. And not only did we end up speaking in mainland China in underground churches, we even preached in government churches, which is unheard of. They just don't allow that. So there I am. And the funny thing is they said,
talk about an open door series.
Unbelievable. I'm there, the Karaite Jew, with the Methodist minister, and we're preaching this Hebrew message not only in the underground churches, but in the government churches, where they told us there's spies in the church. Don't say anything about the government. Whatever you say will be reported on Monday morning to the communist authorities. It's not maybe. We know this for a fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The pastor of one of the churches told me, he says, I have a meeting every Monday morning and I tell the authorities what happened in church on Sunday morning. And that's not the spy. That's just the pastor. That's his official job to report back to the government. Then their spies will tell them what really happened, So it was an amazing experience. I ended up staying for a year in China. I ended up getting a job as an English teacher in China, which look, part of it was that I was going through some difficult personal things in my life, and I needed a break from ministry. As you know, Michael, ministry takes everything you have out of you. It takes not just physically, emotionally, it takes everything. It's draining. And I decided I needed a break. So I ended up getting this job as a high school teacher in China, teaching English. And we'll show up here on the screen me standing in China. I ended up going to the Great Wall of China, Roll Tide. And then I was a high school teacher. I had 658 high school students. And here in this picture, you can see I'm with some of my students who are twins. I actually had a lot of twins. There's many sets of twins I had. And that's because they had a one-child policy. So you can get around that if you have twins.
Oh.
But there I was in China teaching high school, teaching English to 658 students. I had no idea how to do that. I was terrified the first day. I don't know how to teach English. I don't know how to teach high school kids. And I've made the joke when I did prison ministry that I've always wanted a captive audience. And the prisoners don't laugh at that. They don't think it's funny. But I think it's hilarious. But they're actually not a captive audience, because in the prison, they could decide whether they have to be in prison. They're captives, but they're not captive to the chapel, to the teaching event. They can go in the yard and whatever else they do in prison. But in high school, they were a captive audience. They had no choice but to be in class. So there I am teaching 658 high school students in China. They're 15 and 16-year-old boys and girls. And I said, well, what do you want me to teach? They said, well, our students know grammar really well. In fact, they probably know grammar better than you do. And I'll just give you an example. I had students who would ask me, they'd say, Lao Shi, teacher, is chair a countable noun or an uncountable noun? And I would say, there is no such thing in English. They'd say, yes, there is. It's how you know the difference between you can say a chair, but you can't say a weather. Weather's not a countable noun, and chair is. I'm like, I didn't know we had that. I just know how to speak the language. And in Hebrew as well, it's just, just like in English. But Chinese has no such thing. So they have to learn for each word in the English language, is it a countable noun or an uncountable noun?
Yeah. Never thought of it.
I know.
Deer, fish.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so that, well, you can say a deer, but you can't say a weather. So they knew grammar better than I knew English grammar. So the point was, they said, we don't need you to teach our students grammar. They know it better than you do. What we want you to teach them about is your culture. I said, my culture? I said, Warsher Yotairen, I'm Jewish. You want me to teach my culture? And they were excited when they heard this. And they knew before I came that I was Israeli, but they didn't connect that with Jewish necessarily. They said, oh, you're Jewish. And every person I met in China had the same response when I said I was Jewish. And I have to say the Chinese culture they don't have political correctness quite yet. So they think in stereotypes. And when I said I was Jewish, they'd say, oh, Jewish, very smart, very rich. And I said, well, not exactly. If I was very rich, I wouldn't be teaching high school to 658 brats in China. I would be sitting on the beach in Hainan sipping lemonade. But I am very smart. I accept that. I agree. And they said, this is wonderful. If you teach our students about your culture, it'll unlock the secret for them to becoming very smart and very rich. In other words, they believed that there must be something in the Jewish culture that makes them very smart and very rich. And if I would share that with the students, they would become very smart and rich, which was their objective in life, to be rich at least. Anyway, so there I am in China. I said, well, what about my culture do they specifically want to hear? And they said, Chinese people love to hear about 3 things. They love to hear about food, travel, and holidays. And the ideal Chinese story is you go on holiday, you go on vacation traveling during the holiday, and you eat a special type of noodles. And I literally would have colleagues who would go away on vacation during the Chinese New Year holiday, and they would come back and show me pictures on their Huawei phone, and they would say to me, these are the noodles I ate in Guilin. And I would say, really? Those are the noodles you ate last night here in town? They're like, no, very special noodles, special spice. And this was a big deal to them that it was special noodles with special spice. So there I am, and I end up teaching classes about food, Jewish food. Don't eat pork. They were shocked by that. My students looked at me and they said, how are you alive? And I said, I seem to be doing pretty well.
No dog, no cat? Yeah.
Well,
wow.
I can't say that the Chinese eat cat because I didn't see that.
Oh.
But I saw dogs hanging skinned and quartered in the marketplace.
Okay.
So I know that for a fact they eat dog. And they would say, well, we don't eat it all the time, only when we're cold in the winter. That's what they do. Anyway, I end up teaching a lot about the holidays. One of my first classes was about Sukkot, the Feast of Booths.
You're teaching this in a secular, communist-controlled
Absolutely.
high school.
This is a private, secular high school. I had 658 students. 3 of them were Christians. 1 of them was a Muslim. The other 654 were atheists who occasionally worship their ancestors. And they would tell me, Meo Shangdi, there's no such thing as God. And I would say, I'm not trying to teach you that there's such a thing as God. I'm trying to teach you what the Jewish culture is. It's illegal to proselytize, but I'm a Jew. I don't proselytize. And I wasn't trying to convince them of anything. I was telling them, this is my culture. And they loved that. They appreciated it. And they really believed they'd somehow get rich from understanding the Jewish culture. It's not even a joke. So anyway, there I am in China. And I ended up teaching a class about Sukkot. I taught them that my ancestors were slaves in Egypt, and the God of Israel, whose name was Yehovah, that's the Chinese of Yehovah, and it's actually written in the Chinese Bible, Yehovah. And so all my students knew that the God of the Yotairen, of the Jews, is Yehovah, that he took us out of the land of Egypt into the desert, and he proclaimed to us from the cloud, from the top of the mountain. He said, Anochi Yehovah Elohecha, I am Yehovah, your God. And all my students, they learned this, and they, they thought this is fascinating, the Jewish culture.
Don't even learn that in Christian church in America.
You don't?
Okay. No.
and look, here's how I explained it to them, and they really appreciated this. So Sukkot coincided that year with the Mooncake Festival, and I said to them, this is your big holiday, one of your 3rd biggest holiday, Mooncake Festival. Why do you eat the mooncakes? And they said, because it's the Mooncake Festival. Yeah, I get that. But why mooncakes? Because it's the Mooncake Festival. And I'm like, so there's some history behind it, and you have no idea what it is. And the reason that Jews are very smart and very rich is because we know why we do what we do. And that's actually true, I believe. I mean, I was sharing them my culture, but I do think there's something to that you even have Jews who are secular who win the Nobel Prize because we put value on knowledge. And also, I think we're blessed by the creator of the universe as well, but we do culturally put value on knowledge. So there I was, and I ended up teaching 2 classes on Christmas. Christmas. They said, yes, you're Jewish, but you're also an American. We want to know about Christmas. And why do they want to know about Christmas? They said, in America, they lament the commercialization of Christmas. The Chinese people are yearning for the commercialization of Christmas. They know there's some secret in Christmas that will create Black Friday. They just know it, or it's called Black Friday. They know there's some way that they can get rich from Christmas. They just need to figure it out and unlock the secret to produce this internal Christmas economy, and then they won't have to depend on exports, which they're very concerned about.
And so this is an expectation. You're talking about the entire student body. This is the cultural
this is all Chinese
expectation.
Society. Chinese society is yearning for figuring out the secret to Christmas. So I teach 2 classes on Christmas. The first one I teach about Santa Claus.
A Jew teach about, okay, go ahead.
Here I am, an Israeli Jew teaching about Christmas to the Chinese atheists who tell me, Meo Shangdi, there's no such thing as God. So I explain about Santa Claus, and really my job is to teach English. So when I tell them about Christmas, I've got to emphasize, Santa Claus rides a sleigh, and I teach them the word sleigh and how it's spelled and what it is. And these are people who come from a subtropical environment. They've only seen sleighs on television.
A lot of reindeer down there.
There's a lot of rain, but not so much reindeer. It once rained for 88 days straight in Changsha. Anyway, but no reindeer. So I tell them about sleigh and Santa Claus and chimney and things that, they didn't know. Even if they culturally knew what a chimney was, they didn't know the word in English. I ended up teaching a second class because they wanted more, and I taught them about Yeshua. And, they call him in Chinese Yesua. It's a tonal language. I teach them about Yesua, and I tell them Yesua was actually this Jewish man who lived 2,000 years ago in Israel, the country of Israel where I live, and he was a Jewish man named Yeshua. And they said, Lauscher, they was raising their hand. Oh, Lauscher, you're confused. Yesua wasn't a Jewish man. Yesua he wasn't Yotairen, Jewish. He was Jidujao. He was Christian. And I said, no, actually he was, unlike Santa Claus, who was a fictitious character, a mythical character. And you have to understand, in their culture, there's a lot of mythical characters. There's millions of gods. And one of their favorite gods is the Chinese god of fortune. He's this man who wears a red coat and has a long black beard. And he gives you a red envelope on the Chinese New Year. And there's money in that red envelope. And this is a very important concept in Chinese culture, the red envelope with money. And so they pray to the god of fortune, and they get money in the red envelope. And so I said,
Sounds
no.
like Jesus in the televangelist world.
Well, what I explained to them is that this man who lived 2,000 years ago, Yeshua, isn't like the Chinese god of fortune or like Santa Claus. He was a real person, and he was Jewish. He was a Yotairen, and his name was Yeshua. And they said, oh, Yesua, Jewish, very smart, very rich. I'm like, well, not exactly. He was very smart. So here's me, the Jew from Israel, trying to teach the Christians about Christmas, which they think they can get rich from. And I'm telling them that Jesus was really Yeshua, who lived 2,000 years ago. And they're like, oh, he was a real person and he was Jewish? It's amazing. What an incredible experience. It was such a blessing. I actually taught one class about Hanukkah. And in the Open Door series, I think it's the third volume here.
Third volume,
it's called Stand Against the Ban. They got the English language teaching version of Stand Against the Ban.
Did they?
They did. It was amazing. I taught them about how when the Greeks came to Israel, and here's how I explained it to them, because I need to explain it to them in terms they'll understand in their culture. So I said, imagine if the Japanese came, because they've got issues with the Japanese to this day. In some ways, even more than the Jews do with the Germans. In many ways. I've never heard a Jew say, I hate Germans. My students would very openly say, we hate the Japanese. They just hate them, even because of what happened in World War II. And so I explained, imagine if the Japanese came and instead of wanting to kill you with swords and guns, they said to you, you must be Japanese, you must speak Japanese, you have to adopt the Japanese culture, and you have to speak the Japanese language, what would you do? And my little 15-year-old boy said, we would kill them. And little 15-year-old kids. And I said, well, this is what the Greeks wanted to do to the Jews. They didn't want to kill our bodies, they wanted to destroy our souls and make us Greeks. And the way they wanted to do it is they imposed certain laws upon us. And I had to keep this message real simple. I brought the three main things. I told them that, first they banned Shabbat. And I said, do you know what that is? And I told them the Chinese word for Shabbat, which is An Shirura. And I remember the looks on the children and these students. They had these very solemn looks. They said, we know what it is. I said, what? What is it? They said, it's when you're dead. I said, no, it's not when you're dead. Because they think, think about like rest in peace. An Shirura
okay.
literally means day of rest. They think it's when you're dead. I explained, no, it's the reason you have a 7-day week. And even they have a 7-day week. You work 6 days and rest on the 7th. And they're like, oh, okay, it came from that. And then I explained, the other thing is they forbade circumcision, the Greeks. And I tried to explain to them what circumcision was.
Oh, that must have been.
Oh, they'd never
high
heard of
school
this
students.
concept, right? They'd never heard of this concept. I showed them the Chinese word. They didn't know what that word meant. And I tried to explain to them, and I remember the look of the little girls. They said, so you don't have? I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. And I literally had to, I'm not kidding, draw a picture on the blackboard, take an eraser, and I remember the looks, why? And I explained this is a covenant between the God of Israel and the people of Israel going back 4,000 years, and the Chinese people respect that. They understand that concept and they respect it.
It's their ancestor worship going back.
They understand ancient things from ancient culture. They don't necessarily know the history behind it, but they respect it.
Right.
And they respected this covenant. And then finally I explained they forbade us to speak the name of the God of Israel, which is what Stand Against the Ban is about. And it says this in the ancient sources, that this ban on speaking the name Yehovah actually started out as a Greek prohibition to wipe out Judaism. And I explained it, and I said to my students, my 658 students, do you know what the name of the God of Israel is? And they all responded, Yehovah. And I was so proud of them. It was amazing. What a blessing I had there. It was a great experience in China.